Welcome, Exiles. Let's talk the Balanced Manifesto for Expedition. I went through, I read it all, and now I'm going to give you the bullet point version of the biggest changes, what they affect, what they don't affect, and I guess a little bit of my take on what I think of the changes that are the most impactful. Let's get into it. So to kick things off, we have the greater support gem reduction. All this boils down to is support gem power has been lowered, and they're trying to hit the most egregious cases and standardize support gems. So that way, if a support gem is in the category of it gives you a little bit of benefit, then it's going to give you in this range of damage. If it gives you only damage, it's going to be in this range of damage. And if it gives you damage but a downside, it's going to be in this range of damage, so forth like that. They're trying to standardize gems and lower the power, basically lowering the ceiling of what you can expect. And in some cases, they felt that certain gems were hit particularly hard, like Ground Slam, for example. It's one of the melee cases. They stated this gem got hit hard with these nerfs, so they're going to counter buff the gem so that way it is hurt less by the nerfs to support gems. So Ground Slam used to be a max of about 150%, now it's 188. Supposedly this is supposed to counteract how hard it got hit by the support gems. I don't know how much it counteracts it. I don't really know because we don't know the numbers for each support gem, but that's just what they're doing. Another big change, this is hugely impactful, and I'm glad about this because I hate war cries. If you're a war cry fan, you're not going to be happy, but they finally did it. They took out the damage multiplier of Seismic Cry. Seismic Cry used to be insanely mandatory for slams. If you didn't use it, you were doing significantly less damage, and they completely gutted that. So now if you're playing slam builds, you aren't necessarily going to feel like you're pigeonholed into war cries, although you're probably still going to use Intimidating Cry because double damage is insane. But yeah, that's a big change there. Another change I think I should mention that I accidentally skipped over for a second there is they're saying certain gems, like for bow skills, they felt bow skills were underperforming compared to a lot of other skill types, which is very true. Bow skills are generally a lot farther behind than other skills. They didn't change the support gems as much. So Barrage, Greater Multiple Projectiles, Chain, some of these support gems, they didn't really nerf them. Basically because they said bow skills aren't really that good, so we don't feel like they need the nerf as much, for example. Another thing about bow skills is freaking screw Barrage. I don't know if anyone else feels like this, but I haven't played many bow builds since Barrage support's been introduced, because I feel like if I'm playing a bow build, I have to use Barrage support. It's a similar thing to how if I'm playing a slam build, I feel like I have to use War Cries. It's not a good feeling. I don't like Barrage. I don't want to feel like every bow build I play is Barrage. So, I don't know. I'm not exactly... This doesn't change bows for me too much. I'm probably still just not going to touch them because I'm going to feel like I have to play Barrage if I'm playing with a bow. So it is what it is. Also, looking at traps, this is another category of they didn't feel like the trap skills were overperforming, so they didn't really nerf trap support specifically. This is an example of basically GGG is realizing in comparison damage-wise, traps are strictly worse than mines. You know, they're very similar playstyles. Mines just do, you know, way more damage, so they thought, we're going to nerf the mine supports, but traps we're going to leave, because traps, they're not good enough to be worthy of a nerf, I guess. So traps are chilling. If you like trap builds, they're going to be basically the same after the patch, if not buffed, because there are some buffs to Lightning Spire Trap and Seismic Trap. I don't know if I'd want to play with those, but they're not worse, so they're okay. They survived. Other big support gem changes that weren't nerfs were the crit strikes and crit damage supports. These have been buffed. Maybe it makes them a usable choice. Maybe you don't feel so bad when you're going down to look at your damage links and these are the only choices you have left. I don't really know. We'll see if it ends up making them worth using or not, or comparable to other damage supports after the nerfs. It might not. I don't know. The goal is it will, though. And then this is a huge one. Archmage, the Mana Boys are finally getting hurt. They have been on the top echelon of S tier builds ever since the creation of Archmage. Archmage has been disgusting, and they are getting hit big. This used to be 108% of mana cost dealt as damage. Now it's 60%, so that's a huge damage nerf to Archmage support. That being said, I personally am going to be of the belief that Archmage and mana builds are still going to be very strong. The reality is a ton of your damage always came from Arcane Cloak, and in these patch notes, I don't think I see Arcane Cloak mentioned once, which in my mind means Archmage builds are still going to be disgustingly good. We'll see if they are. That's just my prediction. So let me know if you guys think Archmage is dead, or if you think that mana builds are still alive. I think they're still alive. This was one of the most disgusting supports in the game by far. I think it's still going to be a good amount of damage. We will see, though. We will see. Time will tell. Up next, things like chain support and other supports where the quality didn't make sense in terms of the support gem you're using. I guess they changed the quality. So, for example, chain support got chaining range. I don't know how much this will affect stuff. This won't affect things too much, I don't think. But we'll see. Maybe some old qualities will get some cool effects. Who knows? Next up, a big one, the Flask system rework. This thing boils down to, A, power flasks are getting hit hard. Things like Bottle Faith, things like Lion's Roar, things that just provide you pure damage at Zeri's Promise. I'm guessing those are getting a big damage cut. We will see. They mentioned that that's specifically the things that got hit the hardest, were the things that provided the most power. So I'm guessing those flasks are going to see a big hit. One of the biggest flasks that got hit is our boy, the Diamond Flask. Never again will we be able to use Diamond Flask for Lucky Crit. It now gives 100% increased crit chance. This is... I want to say it's probably still going to be maybe used in builds, but it's a huge, huge damage nerf. Lucky Crit is insane for how much it gives you damage-wise. It makes things that give Lucky Crit way more interesting or way more compelling because you don't get it in your flask anymore. So maybe some of those things that you can get Lucky Crit from other places, like the Keystone, I kind of forget which one it is, the Marraketh Jewel Keystone. There's some other places where you can get lucky. Maybe those become more compelling options, but now Diamond Flask took a huge hit, and some of the unique flasks are probably going to take huge hits as well. The other things they've changed with the flask system is flash charges are now a lot more harder to come by. They've reduced it by 75% or something like that, they said. But in exchange for making our flasks have less charges, be less spammable, they're giving us Instilling Orbs and Enkindling Orbs. Basically, you can either set a condition on your flask to automatically trigger, so you don't have to press the button, which I'm all for. The less buttons I have to press, I'm all for. I'm a Righteous Fire guy, it's what I do. And then there's Instilling Orb. This one... or I don't know if I mix these up, but one of them basically gives you a condition, and the other one either gives you like more flask effect or flash duration, but it makes it so you can't gain flash charges during the duration of the flask. They have some interesting use cases, I'm guessing, for burst damaging bosses. If you want some super powerful flasks during a specific window to kill a boss, you're probably going to use the one that gives you some effect or some flash duration. Or, on the other case, you just don't want to press buttons, you're me, you play Righteous Fire, you're going to use the conditionals where it triggers on certain scenarios where you need it. The thing about these orbs is, they're now in the drop table. I don't know how rare they're going to be. If they're super rare and they're hard to come by, these might be pretty expensive and you might not actually be able to afford using these on every build you play. If you play multiple builds, you might not be able to keep souping up your flasks with the good orbs. I don't know what to expect about this. Another thing about the Diamond Flask nerf, or the Diamond Flask, is they also mentioned this. They did a change where it said, basically enemies on consecrated ground, they used to take they basically had increased critical strike chance against them. They took that away. They were basically saying, we didn't want Sulfur Flask to be just strictly better than Diamond Flask, so we're killing consecrated ground and making it worse. I don't necessarily like this because it hurts builds like Purifying Flame, like Conk Ground, or Conk Path, where you'd hit an enemy, you'd create Conk Ground, and then you'd hit them again, and they'd have increased crit chance against them because of the Conk Ground. That's one of the benefits of builds like that. It basically hurts those builds, and I think it's kind of out left field. I don't know. I mean, sure, it makes Sulfur Flask not a go-to option over Diamond Flask, but I don't know. Feels a little bit bad there for the Conk Ground boys. And as I said before with flasks, the biggest, most powerful flasks are the ones that are getting the nerfs. So I'm guessing Bottled Faith, Taste of Hate, the ones that give you really pure power, those are the ones getting nerfs. Surprisingly enough to me, Dying Sun isn't getting a nerf to its actual power, but it's getting a nerf to its uptime. So it's making it consume more flash charges and have a lower duration. How much it kills the uptime, we don't know yet, we'll see. But I think that's still maybe a good option if you want to basically delete a boss. Dying Sun giving you additional projectiles, area of effect can be a huge power flask basically. So that's still pretty cool, and there's more options for getting even more projectiles than you could get from before with Dying Sun. So that's kind of cool. I can get behind that a little bit. I don't know how bad the uptime is going to feel though. Maybe it feels really bad and you don't like it. We will see. Aside from these big changes to Flasks, they also are nerfing Flask notables for cluster jewels, and they're trying to make passives on the tree feel more interesting or more compelling. So they gave some Flask duration, and they changed around where Flask effect was on the tree. We'll see when we get the updated, basically passive tree, where all the stuff changed. So I don't know what to expect from this. I just know, okay, now there's a notable that's natural remedies, 20% Flask effect duration, Flask effect 10%, remove maim and hinder on use Flask. That's kind of cool. I don't think it's going to replace a hinder immunity jewel, a maim immunity jewel. I don't think I'm probably going to pick this up unless I'm specifically min-maxing Flask effect, so I'm not sure that's really compelling enough for me. We'll see if the other notables are decent enough. I don't know. We will see. They also did other things, like they changed enduring mana flasks. That way it doesn't have a penalty to its duration, so you can potentially have some really long duration for these enduring flasks, but now you get less mana from them, so it's less powerful in builds like Mind Over Matter Pathfinder, for example. I don't know how much that'll affect stuff like that. We don't know the numbers, but that's just the changes they're trying to inflict. And another note, Adrenaline is dead. They changed it from 20 to 30, which is maybe too much movement speed for an affix, but they made it 6 to 8, which is basically I don't care about that affix anymore. It's not an affix even worth trying to get. I don't know, 6 to 8% movement speed is really pathetic compared to 20 to 30. So there goes your Quicksilvers of Adrenaline there now. Significantly worse. Quicksilver of Adrenaline versus Quicksilver without Adrenaline. They're basically the same flask at this point. Funny, they said this is now 6 to 8%. I wonder, well, I don't wonder. I would think they would be sure to nerf the Veiled Craft that can give you a 10 to 12% movement speed on it and 50% stun avoidance. So I'm guessing that craft just now gives you 50% stun avoidance. It would be funny if they just forgot about that, and you can craft on an affix that does 10 to 12, which is more than Adrenaline, along with the stun avoidance. But for sure, they probably adjusted that. I don't see how they would do this change to Adrenaline without changing that as well. Now for probably the biggest change besides the support gem nerf, the Ailment Mitigation nerf. I thought they were going to hit things like the bench crafts, the crafts you get on your gear, so that way builds that don't have ascendancies for avoid elemental avoidance couldn't easily do it, but they went for the big kahuna. They're hitting all the ascendancies that had ailment avoidance. We're talking Raider, Elementalist, Inquisitor, Hierophant. All the ones that have elemental avoidance are getting hit. The stronger ones, Elementalist and Inquisitor, where they give you insane powers along with the notables that give you elemental avoidance, those ones get their elemental avoidance completely removed. For ones that are less powerful, but still pretty strong, I'd say Raider, Hierophant, those ones, they're going to retain some amount of elemental avoidance, like 50% or something, but now you have to invest in the gear to get the rest of your way to 100% elemental immune. Basically, this just means if you're trying to avoid elemental ailments, it's now going to cost you. You're going to have to invest in gear, you're going to have to invest in passives. It's not going to come for free, it's not going to be easy to get. And there's going to be a lot of people dying to strong boxes again, is probably what I got out of that. And because the reality is the Flask getting 1% immunity, that's not going to feel good. So you're going to have to pick and choose your battles. Maybe just forget about being Ignite immune, just get Freeze immune somewhere. You know, you're going to have to pick and choose your battles, how you're going to adjust for this. Also, for Kirk's immunity, they also mentioned Bleed and Corrupted Blood. They said, okay, there's not much options for Bleed and Corrupted Blood. Since we're taking away your ability to basically be Bleed immune and Curse immune from your Flasks, so we're going to give you some back with it being able to invest into it in a tree. I don't know how strong these are going to be between the Pantheon and the passives. Maybe it'll be useful. I kind of have my doubts it'll be useful enough. I think more or less people are just going to have to not run Temp Chains maps. If you get a Temp Chains map, you just re-roll it. I don't think there's going to be enough reason or enough value out of the investment on the tree where people are going to actually be picking up Curse immunity on the tree. I think it's going to be Vendiria's Veil, the Itziri's Reflection, or you just don't run Temp Chains. Those are your three options now, basically. So yeah, that's that. For Poison, they buffed Poison by 50% more damage, so this is a huge buff for builds that basically weren't Assassin. They nerfed Assassin pretty hard for the Poison stuff. That's really all you gotta know. And they also changed Corralitos to be specific to Critical Strike Poison builds and not just Poison builds in general, where you would use it even if you weren't a crit build. They also nerfed Pathfinder slightly, and they added or change the poison support to be a critical strike affliction support. So that way there's another option for scaling into crit ailments like crit bleed, crit ignite. Maybe that could be interesting. I don't know. I've always toyed with it in my mind that maybe that would be cool. So we'll see if that's actually a good enough support to make those builds maybe more interesting, more viable. Next up, this is probably this is a stupid thing to get happy about, or maybe it's not a stupid thing to get happy about, but the amount of happiness I have from it's maybe stupid, but this change here makes me so freaking happy because it tells you, A, how badly we are shocked as players, and we know how badly we are shocking our enemies. It'll actually tell you the number. You see here, it says, okay, you're shocking Suncolor for 11% shock, or you're being shocked yourself for 50%. I think this is huge, because this is a very thing where you never know how much you're shocking somebody for, how much you're chilling something for. This is something you always have to go in and test in like PvP arenas to narrow down and do math and figure out calculations on the side from POB. I really like now that I can just play the game and see what I'm actually getting out of the shock effect investment on the tree and whatnot in game in real time. So I like that a lot. They also reduce the ailment thresholds for bosses like Maven, Elder, Shaper. All those bosses have their ailment thresholds significantly reduced. That means investing into shock effect, chill effect, stuff like that, you're going to get a lot better results than you did before. This is, I believe, basically a slight nerf to Elementalist, and that other builds can do shocks and chills too now, maybe, but I don't know. I think the big change here is we can just now we know how much we're doing to bosses, and now we can actually maybe reliably inflict ailments on bosses, so that'll be cool. Now here's the big nerf to cast on crit builds. They are adding a mana cost, and this also affects any trigger abilities like cast when damage taken, stuff like that. Stuff that gets triggered now has a mana cost. This is going to hurt cast on crit builds, and that now you have to think about it more, you have to manage your mana, but personally I'm betting on cast on crit builds are still going to be really freaking good. That's my prediction. We will see. Maybe they'll just be dead on arrival, but I think they're still going to be really good. And the reason they did this is they said because cast on crit builds basically avoid mana costs, they felt in a design space where cast on crit exists, they can't design really powerful, big, impactful spells because somebody's just going to take it, link it to cast on crit, and then they're triggering it just like that, and it just is nullified because there is no cost to it, and that's something people can do easily. So I think this is cool. Now maybe we're going to see more skill gems that are really cool, really powerful in terms of spells. Big spells could be interesting. I don't know. We'll see what that is. But I think this kind of makes sense. I mean, cast and crit's disgustingly strong. We'll see if it kills cast and crit. I think cast and crit will be fine, though. Flame Dash, Dash, Smoke Mine. Basically, these all got hit hard. All the buff they had for extra CDR to basically make them really good movement skills got pretty much taken away. They are far and away way better than other movement skills like Frost Blink and whatnot, so this kind of makes sense. I think this is going to feel bad in terms of how much worse the cooldown for these things feel. As long as I think it's just going to first feel worse for moving around. So we're going to maybe want builds with better movement speed or give better attack speed for shield charge and whirling blades or whatnot, because this extra cooldown is, the loss of cooldown recovery is pretty significant, along with also the big nerf was to Second Wind, where now it provides reduced CDR, so you're only picking up Second Wind if you want the extra cooldown. It's not going to help you get additional cooldown recovery rates. But it's not too bad. It's only 5% reduced at level 20, rather than getting like 20% increase. So it's still a pretty big change. Movement skills will feel a decent amount worse. If you're speed leveling with Smoke Mine, I don't know if it's going to be the best choice anymore, because Smoke Mine got hit hard, whereas Dash and Flame Dash got hit. They still got hit, but a lot less than Smoke Mine did. Smoke Mine had its cooldown like doubled, and its movement speed buff significantly reduced. Arcane Surge is another big nerf. It took away the base percent mana regen. This is huge for Mind Over Matter builds. That was a huge amount of extra mana sustain you could get, and they changed it out for increased mana regeneration rate, which is just going to be, in my guess, probably pathetic in comparison to the base mana percentage regen you'd get in terms of how much mana it actually helps you regen. So that's going to be huge for Arcane Surge, a pretty big nerf there. And Fortify Effect. Finally, after so many gauntlets of Darky just dominating with Fortify Effect, They decided to give Fortify Effect the axe. They were tired of watching people pretty much completely mitigate hits due to Fortify Effect, and now they want the top end to be 40% less damage taken. I think for the most part this doesn't affect... I think most people it's not going to affect. If you're adding in Fortify, in most builds you're adding it in, you're just grabbing Fortify and you're just taking 20% less damage, you're chilling. And you're fine. But for builds where you're playing hardcore and you're min-maxing into Fortify Effect, this is going to hurt a lot because they're reducing it significantly or they're replacing it with something that they deem acceptable to be stacked that's not Fortify Effect. So we'll see what the replacement and what the significant reductions are, but basically it means Fortify Effect stacking is no longer going to be super meta in hardcore and super required to be the most competitive or the best build. But for most people, standard softcore players, I think this just doesn't change anything because most people don't invest into Fortify Effect. They just grab Fortify for an extra 20% less damage taken, and they're chilling. Damage over time multiplier. The changes to this are basically cluster jewels no longer are giving damage over time multiplier in the small passives and the large and the medium passives. So pretty much what this means to me is more than likely, if you're an Ignite build, if you're a Cold Dot build, a Chaos Dot build, Cluster Jewels might no longer be the play. It might just be passive tree or bust, or maybe they'll be the play still, but just barely the play. I don't know how much this nerf's going to hurt. I think it's going to hurt a lot for me. If I'm playing Righteous Fire, I'm sure going to feel a big damage reduction. I think a lot of dot builds are going to feel big damage reductions. The one saving grace of the changes here where you'll feel some little buff is the change where you can now get damage over time multiplier as a suffix. This means that items that are really good, like scepters that are really powerful, are going to be easier to roll, but I don't think it's going to come anywhere close to making up for the downside of losing damage over time multiplier on the Cluster Jewels. So we'll see how this shakes up and how much this hurts Righteous Fire and other dot builds like Burning Arrow, Ignite, and stuff like that, but it's going to be a pretty heavy hitting nerf in terms of dot builds. After that, Veiled mods. Basically, the long and the short is, Veiled crafting at the high end has been significantly lowered in power. You can no longer create multiple Veiled mod crafted items. You can no longer force on crazy, like, 4 Veiled mod items. Basically, what you could do is you could fill up an item with 3 suffixes of just Veiled mods and the 4th prefix or something like that. You could get pretty crazy with the crafting. They're taking that away. They're making it so Aisling's bench is now super risky, where it removes a random modifier when it adds a Veiled modifier. So basically, they're just nerfing Veiled crafting. Veiled crafting was too strong. They're nerfing it. Rest in peace, Veiled crafting. Other changes, this is one we can be proud of. I don't know of any other potato person who went and min-max focus cooldown besides me. So I'm gonna claim this one as my own, but they're making it so focus cooldown no longer expires while active. So the character we created, that was like 1,000x of investment just to get permanent uptime on our focus, which wasn't even permanent because any amount of lag time meant it wasn't permanent and we were screwed. But that character that was 1,000x and still bad, and now is dead, I guess. I don't know. It was dead before. This change doesn't make sense to me. I don't think focus was busted, but now it's definitely not busted. I don't know. This change I just think is funny. It's not going to affect pretty much anyone. It's going to affect the people that use focus a little bit, but for the most part, it's not a big change to most people. Elementalist is receiving multiple nerfs, which makes sense. The Golem nodes on Elementalist were probably the best ascendancy nodes in the game. I felt whenever I was making a build, and it could be pretty much anything. Pretty much any build, I could somehow tag in a reason to play it as Elementalist because of how strong Elementalist was. And this is definitely going to reduce this. They take away the elemental ailment avoidance. They're taking away some of the extra golems, and they're taking away some of the damage. The Elementalist got hit pretty big in terms of the golem nodes. If you don't use the golem nodes on Elementalist, it seems like you're mostly fine, but the golem nodes got hit hard. For Raider Ascendancy, the Onslaught, the first notable that give you 50% Onslaught effect, that one, the 50% effect got taken away because they felt that node was too strong. So Raider got a little bit of a nerf there. Abyssal Jewels no longer can roll Onslaught on kills. That means you no longer can get it very easily on an Abyssal Jewel. You have to get Onslaught somewhere else now. Basically, you're going to get it on your boots now. So I don't know if that changes much. You're just going to get it on your boots. Spectral Shield Throw has been buffed. So shout out to my boy MBX, fellow Spectral Shield Throw lover, rejoice, because now we don't need Divide and Conquer. Divide and Conquer is basically just innately, you get it with playing Shield Throw. You don't need this jewel anymore. Gives you a jewel socket back, and apparently the damage numbers have been greatly boosted. So Spectral Throw with the new Shield Crush with Shield Charge looking good. We'll see what the numbers are exactly, but this is awesome for Spectral Throw. It definitely was lower damage, so it makes sense that it got a nice buff. Other things that got nerfed: Fire Burst catching a pretty big nerf, Hollow Palm catching a decent sized nerf, Blade Blast catching lower area. I don't know how much this has lowered the area. It took away a nerf, which you can get from gloves, so that's not big. That's not too big for the top end of Blade Blast, but it said its area multiplier with Blade Vortex increased to compensate. So I don't know what all this means. Blade Blast is arguably one of the best skills in the game by a good margin, way better than a lot of underperforming skills. So we'll see what this means. We don't have numbers, but Blade Blast is getting hit. How much it gets hit, I don't know. I think it'll probably still be good if the area thing still helps it be decent on overlapping. We'll see. And they've also changed existing unarmed uniques to not work with Concoction. So if you're planning on playing Explosive Concoction, the new throw your flask, blow things up build, don't plan on using any of the unarmed uniques. They aren't made to work with that new gem. And then last but not least, for the patch notes, we have the buffs to underperforming skills. Basically, there's some skills that aren't as good as other skills that seem to have gotten some decent buffs, like 20% damage or something. I don't know if this is going to be enough to make those skills worth using. Funny enough, in these buffs, the rotation speed of Flamethrower Trap no longer scales with increases to cast speed. That, in my mind, is a nerf. So I'm not sure how it got misplaced into the buff section to underperforming skills, but it's in there. And there's some other stuff that basically just got small numerical buffs. I don't know. I don't think this is going to be enough to make those skills worth using. Like, you have things like Carry On Golems didn't get nerfed at all in these changes. I don't see a buff in here that makes any of these skills come close to skills like Carry On Golems or other skills that are still very much at the top and didn't seem to have gotten touched. But then again, we don't know all the specifics of the support gem changes, and maybe those were big enough to really affect some of the top end builds, whereas they didn't affect these skills. But I find that unlikely. Long and the short is, I think there's gonna definitely be changes to the meta, but at the same time, I think some of the top skills are still going to be on the top. I think the top skills are still going to be on the top, but their damage is lowered. And there's some changes here and there to things that make some significant difference here and there. But I don't know. I don't know if this really shakes up the meta like I was thinking that they were going to shake up the meta. We'll see what other people say when they read through all this and what their hot takes are. But I feel like for the most part, I think the meta is going to be pretty similar to before. And it's just going to be people are dealing less damage. I think those are the biggest changes. I don't know. We'll see what other people think when we get the actual numbers. If maybe there were some things that were crazy number reductions that didn't get mentioned in the Balance Manifesto that are in the patch notes. We will see. That's always possible. Time will tell. Let me know what you guys thought were the biggest, most impactful changes, if I hit all of the ones or if you think there's some I missed. Anyways, I appreciate you all watching. Have an excellent rest of your day.